Hello, my name is Joanne Knight. Welcome to the barn. There's a Statler owner in New Zealand that is struggling a little bit with her edge-to-edge layout, and she sent me an email, and I thought maybe the explanation would be easier if I put it into a little barn buddy, and thought maybe it would help some of you as well. So this is going to be a little short explanation of how to recover a little bit in edge-to-edge mode. I have set up this really sweet quilt that I'm doing for a class sample, and I am going to quilt it in repeat patterns, but I set up the edge to start with. When this particular person set up their edge to edge, they used place two pins, and you can see if I scroll in the little registration marks on the left and on the right. And what that means is when she rolls, Creative Studio, when she gets through quilting this last pattern, is going to ask her to mark those two pins with her machine so she can come back and mark them again after she rolls her quilt. If you mess up and do not mark this correctly, you have a couple of choices to be able to fix it. One is you can scroll in right here, and you see on this particular pattern it has a little straight line. You can toggle that last part of that pattern as unsewn, let Creative Studio sew it again, and it will ask you once again to mark your registration point. So that's one way to do it. When you roll the quilt, you can also put your channel lock on. There's an anytime channel lock right down here at the bottom, and you can put that channel lock on a 0 degrees and start at this starting point on your quilt and go all the way over to this ending point on your quilt to see if you're rolling the quilt straight. And if you are not, you might want to tug that a little bit to make sure that it is rolled straight before you ever tell it to click these 2 points and place 2 pins. So that's one way to make sure that you're rolling straight and to get yourself out of trouble there without going to repeat patterns. If you are using end of set, you can do end of set more than one time. So if you were to mess up on this one and need to roll again, then you can go back and re-click end of set. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a minute. So let me click OK, and as a little extra, in case you don't know, if I right click in an open CAD screen, I can go down to e2e settings. You have to be in the edge-to-edge quilt group to be able to find these settings right here, but you can take a picture of it with your phone or write it down or do a print screen, and that way you know how to set this quilt back up again if you should lose your way. So I'm going to click OK on this particular one. What I was talking about on restarting is you can do it one of two ways. You can tell Creative Studio to restart quilting and restart right at this little point right here and let it quilt the rest of the way if you're in place 2 pins. If you are not in place 2 pins and you're in end of set, what you can do is do end of set a second time. So I'm going to turn the letter C on my keyboard, and we're going to say, I'm going to toggle this sewn, that I have sewn all of this particular pattern. Now I am going to roll my quilt. And you saw my crosshairs blink and catch up a little bit, and we're going to say that I have rolled the quilt, and that's where my end of set is. So I'm going to go to roll quilt. I'm going to tell it, yes, my needle is at the last sewn end point, and say yes. And it's going to roll that quilt up, and you can see that the patterns are still green because I don't have enough room to be able to quilt them because this pattern is really tall. so I didn't roll far enough. So let me roll some more. And now I'm going to go back and say roll quilt again, and you can see that I do not have to have a pattern selected. So I'm going to hit roll quilt and I'm going to say yes, and Creative Studio moves that up and it tells me that I can quilt the pattern. Now you noticed that my pattern is outside of my boundary, so you want to run your machine up right here and make sure that it's in the right position. So let me go back and redo this, and let me show you another way that it can help you here, because this pattern doesn't actually start and end at the bottom. It has a good 3 inches before that pattern is at the bottom. In other words, the start and end of the pattern are kind of 3 inches into the pattern, and that might cause you a problem if you have a smaller throat space or as you roll down the quilt. So let me fix this right quick, and I'm going to show you another little tip. So I'll be right back. So we have gone back to the beginning, more or less. I have closed my setup box and I've said okay, and I'm happy with my pattern. You can see that you can run into a little bit of trouble with a pattern that is taller and the start and end is up into the pattern. So what you can do is select this pattern and go to nodes with F7, and with snaps off, I'm going to pull the end of this pattern down to where it is level with the bottom of the pattern. Now I'm going to scroll in and I'm going to go to nodes, and I'm going to pull, because nodes can slide. So I'm going to pull this out to where it has that nice little curve, and that ending point is going to be in my binding area. You want it to be no lower than what the bottom of the pattern is, because you want the patterns to still nest or still line up the way that they need to. So I am going to pull that down just by using nodes. I didn't change any sewing orders. Now what we're going to do is select the pattern, and toggle pattern as sewn is fighting me. You can see that it's grayed out, so I'm going to right click and go down and tell it to toggle that group as sewn, because just because something's grayed out up here doesn't mean that you can't get to it with a right click. I'm going to hit the letter C on my keyboard to turn my crosshairs back on, and I'm going to put my crosshair where that ending stitch is, and it would be outside of what the boundary is. So I got to put it where that ending stitch is. So I'm going to say roll quilt. Yes, my needle is in that position. Move it up, and now you can see that all of the patterns move up and everything is lined. Now you have to do this with every roll of the quilt. You're going to need to do that before you start quilting, and just go to nodes, make sure your snaps are off, and pull that down until it's on the outside and looks just like that. Then every single time you roll the quilt, you're not going to have to worry about where that ending point is. And you can tell from my boundary that I have just enough area to be able to quilt this particular pattern. What you want to always do is go all the way to the belly bar with your boundary, and that way that'll save you a little bit of aggravation as well. Don't cut yourself short by doing your boundary as short. So I hope that will help you just a little bit, and you'll be able to kind of get yourself out of a bind if you get into it with place 2 pins or end of set.